Well, Pip Williams, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
It's so lovely to be here. Congratulations on your beautiful book, One Italian Summer. I'll hold it up so everyone can see.
You've got my
The
talk version.
Little marks. Yes, no, it doesn't come with tabs.
Yeah, it doesn't come with tabs. I trust that you'll be able to find your way.
So how have you found being a well-known author? Have there been any moments?
You're very generous with the well-known.
Well, we actually found out about you because you were on the top 10 books to read this summer last year, actually. And
really?
So, yeah.
Whose top 10 was that?
Can't remember.
I like that person.
Yeah, it was.
So I wouldn't say I was well-known, but I've really enjoyed. I suppose I've enjoyed making a dream come true.
Yeah.
I guess you're a writer as well,
Yes.
so I think you'll understand what I'm talking about there. And like all dreams, it comes in stages. So my first dream really was to write. I have actually written a book before, which I think you know about, but that was as an academic, and I did that with colleagues.
Yeah.
And so I didn't. That wasn't the kind of writing that I dreamt about. I dreamt about creative writing.
Okay.
Since I was a little girl, actually, I wrote a lot of bad poetry and started a lot of books that were more or less rip-offs of puberty blues.
Okay. Nice.
But abandoned it because, I didn't think that was an actual career. But like all things that were important to you when you were children, I think, that were really important to you, after a while, it starts knocking at your internal door.
Yeah.
And if you ignore it, it knocks louder. And if you ignore it still, it knocks really loud. And I couldn't ignore it anymore.
Yeah.
And so the first dream that came true was actually making time to write.
Yeah.
And doing some writing. So when this got published, that was like winning the lottery.
Yeah. Because you said it came off the slush pile.
Yes.
Which is just amazing.
Yeah, I know, isn't it?
It's fantastic.
Yeah, it is fantastic. So I wrote it, so I did this wonderful trip with my family to Italy as willing workers on organic farms. And while we were over there, Shannon, my partner, and I talked about how when we started on that particular journey, there was nothing to read that would give us guidance about how to be woofers, how to travel with the kids for an extended period of time, how to homeschool, all of that sort of thing. And I'd looked and couldn't find anything, and we thought it would be a good thing to write about. And given that I wanted to be a writer, and I'd been writing, short stories and things like that. Nothing that ever got published, but I'd been jotting away. I kind of thought this would be a great apprenticeship in a way for creative writing, and there was nothing to lose because I was writing about something that would be valuable to my family. If no one else wanted to read it, at least it's something that would remind us of pretty much the best time of our lives as a family. So I came home and I started writing. And the thing that kept me writing was knowing that it would be valuable to us.
Yeah.
Did I dream of it being published? Of course.
Yes.
I did. But in dreaming about it being published, I knew that it had to be more than just our recollections of Great Trip.
Yeah.
For something to be published, I thought, and I think this is true, that it had to resonate in some way with readers.
Yeah.
There had to be something universal about it, and so that's what made me, I suppose, polish it and polish it and polish it and send it out to publishers. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm so glad you did.
Yeah. But when it got picked up by a firm press, it was amazing. Yeah.
Well, you talked about your academic writing.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because academic writing, as far as I know, is quite constrained within very specific
Mm-hmm.
boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
whereas narrative writing can be the opposite. Did you find that liberating or intimidating by comparison?
So I should qualify that my research background, I used to be a quantitative researcher, and that kind of academic writing is very, very restrained, constrained. But for the latter part of my academic career, I was a qualitative researcher. And so the rules are a little bit different. I did a lot of, so qualitative research, we try to find out people's experience of something, their subjective experience of something. And the way we do that is to do interviews, focus groups, we observe. And I suppose in presenting qualitative research, you're often creating a narrative to some extent. So, just as a really quick example, the difference between a quantitative research paper and a qualitative research paper is about 6,000 words.
Wow.
So my qualitative research, I suppose, was a good introduction to writing. So I had to get the grammar right. I had to be writing well enough for that to be published. But it still has constraints. It still has jargon aplenty. Your audience is very niche. And your purpose is incredibly different to writing creative fiction. A funny story, actually. When I did get this picked up by a firm, I went to Melbourne to meet them. And we were chatting and they were asking what I did. And at that point, because when we came back from the trip, I quit academia. It was one of the big revelations I had while I was overseas. I can't go back to that. And I started working at the City of Adelaide as a social planner. So sort of putting my research into practice, which was great, wonderful experience. And that's what a firm knew about me. They knew that I worked in local government. And we were chatting and I said I used to be an academic. And they all laughed and said, "Oh, we have a policy of never publishing academics."
Oh my goodness. I
think they were joking, but they said because it's so hard to retrain them how to write.
Wow.
Yeah, because academics write in such a specific way. And find it quite difficult to write in a way that is commercially interesting or commercially acceptable for creative writing, whether that's fiction or non-fiction. So,
did you find when you were over there on the farms, that there was a part of that academic side of you that was almost observing in a qualitative manner what people were doing and how they were doing it and that kind of thing?
Definitely. So that the research that I used to do was all about work-life integration. So that was my area of expertise, is how we fit everything together in this modern world. And the book that I co-wrote with colleagues is called Time Bomb. Because the theme of that is all about how our construction of time is so problematic. There's all different types of time. There's natural time rhythms. Mothering is something that works on a natural time rhythm. And then we overlay that with a really rigid work time schedule, and they don't fit. And yet we're constantly trying to make them fit. And we compromise the natural time rhythm. That's usually the thing that gets compromised, and that creates stress. Not just for an individual, but for the individual's family and for the community and that they're in, and etc., and the whole society. And so we call it time bomb because these little time bombs go off in people's lives all the time. And ironically, it went off in mine. And going to Italy was actually a way of trying to figure out how we could live better. How we could, the subtitle of the book is across the world and back in search of the good life, and we were trying to live a good life, but we didn't know how to do it. So we went to Italy to try and figure that out. So when I was there, it was just natural for me to I suppose, observe and then think about those sorts of things. How are people putting their lives together? The people who were working the farms that we were staying on, how are they doing this successfully, and are they doing it successfully? I mean, that's part of what the book is about. You know, we have all these idealized notions of what the good life is and what it is to sort of grow your own food and bake your own bread and live in a community that sort of shares food and eating and all of these things. But what I observed was really hard lives, actually, most of the time. So it did make me question what it was we were searching for.
There's so much we could talk about with that. One of the quotes that I pulled from Time Bomb was quite interesting. It said, "When we rush from activity to activity, trying to put together different forms of time with their clockwork and unclocked bodily and natural demands, we are busy. Such busyness is the enemy of thought, planning, and perspective." And you just talked a bit about that, but I wanted to ask, do you feel as though what you learned in Italy helped you to actually escape that trap, or is it something that is a constant threat?
It taught me a lot, and it taught me the importance of assessing early. So I think it is a constant threat. I mean, I think you do have to completely remove yourself from so much of what you do for it not to be something that you have to constantly be reassessing. When we came back from Italy, to be really honest, if you've read the book, nothing much changed. We got back and after a little while I got a job again. You know, we didn't come back and make the farm pay for itself, which is what we originally were hoping would happen. But so much changed. So on the surface nothing changed, but underneath my perspective had shifted completely. And I felt much better equipped to judge when that busyness was becoming overwhelming. So in Time Bomb, we talk about that analogy of the frog in the pot, which is this idea that if you put a frog in a pot of cold water and you slowly heat it up to boiling point, it won't recognize that it's in a dangerously hot situation until it no longer has the capacity to jump out. But if you throw a frog into a boiling pot of water, it will immediately jump out again, knowing that this is a hostile environment. And we are the frog that has been put in the pot of cold water, and we allow it to heat up. We allow our lives to heat up, to become incredibly busy until our lives are hostile environments. But we haven't got the perspective, the energy sometimes to jump out. What Italy, I suppose, did for me, because it was an extended period of time where we had time to think and time to gain perspective and reflect on life, and also reflect on what's most important in terms of striving for. So that even though I still get to a point where the water's getting pretty hot, and that has definitely happened a number of times since we've been back from Italy. Wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have to work and pay for things with cash? So there's definitely been times, but I'm much better at perceiving the rising temperature. And so I will get out of it quicker. Do you know what I mean? Before I get sick. Which essentially is what happens. We get sick if we don't don't remove ourselves from those situations. So
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm afraid it's no sort of wonderful, it doesn't solve all the problems forever. But
but that's really important, being able to recognise, because it can be quite a subtle build of pressure. And even just being able to see when that's happening is sometimes all you need to be able.
Yeah.
If you know then what to do with that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, you know, for a lot of people, you can't actually jump out straight away.
Yeah.
You know, you need a contingency, you need a plan. But it's about trying to figure out, well, what could we do without actually? If I had to leave this job, and it's often job related, unfortunately. If I had to leave this job, what could we live without for a while? You know, yeah.
And also even planning for that, so that you know, if this happens, what do I do?
Yeah.
How do I, you know, so that you're ready for it.
That's right. Yeah.
One of the central themes that comes out in your book is the baking and breaking of bread. When I finished reading it, I had an appetite. We wanted to have pizza and bread and all sorts of things because you write so beautifully. Are you still baking, first of all, because that was one of the struggles that came out, but also do you think there's something about bread that can teach us something about life?
Yes, I'm still baking.
Yes,
and
good.
Yes,
That's good to hear.
So, and I have I in the book I talk about one of the farms that we went to. Ulrike made this extraordinary rye sourdough, and I did actually replicate it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, but I have to admit, I'm giving something away here. I did try to bring back some of her starter, what she calls pasta madre, which is mother dough. We dried it in the sun, wrapped it in foil, and and I tried to smuggle it home. So that's another story. Anyway, it didn't successfully enter the country. But I did manage to make my own and replicate her bread. It was beautiful, but it had a devastating effect on people's.
Oh no!
Without putting too fine a point on it, it wasn't a very sociable bread. Yep. And I found out later, speaking to a baker at the Adelaide show. Yeah. I was asking, why does this happen? My bread gives everybody gas. Yeah. my rye bread. And yet when I was in Europe, we could all eat this with no problems whatsoever. And he said the strains of rye are really different in Australia compared to Europe and Germany, where Ulrika got her rye. Just can't be done. Wow. Anyway, so if you are having problems with heavy rye bread, that's why. Anyway, I digress. So then I went on to making my own pasta madre for a non-rye sourdough, and I'm still making it. So so it's quite an old one now, but it's good.
That's so good.
It's failed me every now and then, and I've gone into a panic, but I've managed to revive it. So no, I love baking. I have to admit though that I make sourdough now, which is a much longer process, but actually takes less of your time in a way, because you just leave it. You assemble it and leave it, and then you do something to it, which takes 3 seconds, and then leave it again, and then you bake it. When I made yeast bread, in some ways that had a nicer effect on my life, because it required my attention for the whole day.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Because you would only prove it for a few hours, and you had to knead it for quite a long time. And that whole process was quite meditative, and you couldn't concentrate on other things. So it was an incredibly focused activity. And I do miss that a little bit with the sourdough, even though the sourdough can take 3 days to make. It doesn't require me to be there.
Yeah.
It's a bit like a washing machine.
Yeah.
You put it on and it does all the work, and you can go off and do something else. But making yeast bread kept me in the house, and it forced me to sit down with my notebook, and I loved it, and just spend that day doing that, concentrating on that. That was the focus. So I think bread, making bread or making anything, it doesn't have to be bread. You could be a gardener and you're planting. It's something that requires your hands and your mind to be engaged in the same thing. I think is just a really wonderful thing to have in your life. Yeah.
And I love that it can't be rushed.
No, it can't. You ruin it if you rush it.
And so many things around us are on demand. And I think that enhances that feeling of being rushed.
Yeah.
Because we want things straight away.
Yeah.
But you can't rush some things.
No.
The things that matter.
And if you do, the result won't be as good.
Yeah.
And the thing about baking bread, and Shannon is the gardener in our house, and we grow a lot of food, is these things take time, but they nourish us.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
So they nourish us in the doing of it, but then we can nourish others in the presentation of it at the end and the sharing of it. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so back to the work. Are you planning on writing another one or another novel?
Well, so I haven't written a novel before, so this was a memoir.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. That's all right. It's funny. Everyone calls it a novel, and one person, I did get some lovely feedback once saying it's novelistic, that it reads a bit like a novel. So I liked that too. So, but like I said before, this was kind of an apprenticeship to writing, and I have always wanted to write fiction, and so now I am 70,000 words into a novel.
Wow.
And I'm loving it.
Yeah.
And I say 70,000 words in, and that sounds like I've hardly got anything left to do, doesn't
depends.
it? But
depends on the subject.
Yeah, that's right. It's been a really different writing process. So I think I was telling you earlier, with One Italian Summer, I always had good intentions. Every day that I didn't work was a writing day. But most of those days I spent doing the washing, baking. I'd like to say cleaning the house, but I hardly ever did that. Having coffee with friends, doing stuff that didn't need to be doing, that I didn't need to be doing. I was just such a good procrastinator, and I really have no idea how I wrote so many words and managed to get a book out because I had no writing practice whatsoever. But every now and then, obviously, I would sit down for 3 or 4 hours and manage to write 1,000 words, and they added up over a couple of years. But with this book that I'm working on now, I did it's historical, an historical novel, and it's largely based in the UK. And so I went on a research trip to the UK last year, and I also did a writing workshop at a wonderful, I don't know if you've heard of Avon.
No.
Avon is England's oldest writing workshop, and they have kind of writers' houses around the country, about 4 absolutely gorgeous kind of old houses that have been gifted to Avon. They do a lot of workshops with kids and schools and underprivileged groups of people, but they also run workshops in every kind of writing genre for anyone who wants to do them. And they're residential workshops. They go for 5 or 6 days. And I did one of those on fiction writing, and it was just fabulous. And I think the thing about a writing workshop like that, a residential workshop, is just it gives you the permission to call yourself a writer.
Yeah.
And you're with a whole lot of other people, often at the same stage as you. And it's a very supportive environment, and it gives you confidence to just do it.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and it did exactly that. It just was the kickstart to start this new project. And so my writing practice has been really different. I basically made a deal with myself. I'm not going to write 1,000 words. I'm not going to sit down for 3 hours. The deal was I'm going to open my laptop and write 1 word. That's all I have to do every day that I don't work.
Yeah.
So I work part-time. So every day I don't work, all I have to do is open the laptop and write a single word. But you can never stop at 1.
No.
And I kind of think of it a bit like exercise. All you really have to do, promise yourself, is to put your running shoes on and walk out the door.
Yeah.
Because once you've done that, you're probably not going to turn around and come back in and take your shoes off. You'll at least walk around the block.
Yeah.
And that's what writing has been like.
Yeah.
So I've never stopped at 1 word.
Yeah.
And so it's been a much more productive time, which is how I've managed to write 70,000 words in sort of 6 months, essentially. Yeah, I know. I don't.
Oh, goodness.
It is amazing because often I mean, I didn't stop at 1 word, but often it might only be 100 words.
Yeah.
But sometimes it was 1,800 words, or depending on how I felt. The other trick, I feel a bit embarrassed about this one, is I really love going out for coffee. I love having a cafe latte at a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And so I actually have my undergraduate degree is in psychology. So this is a classic conditioning experiment.
Yep.
So basically it's very Pavlovian. I basically linked coffee to writing. So I started writing in coffee shops. So I don't write at home very much at all anymore.
Oh, okay.
I would go to a coffee shop with only my laptop, so no book. And I'd buy myself a coffee and I'd open the laptop and write my 1 word.
Yeah.
And after a while, I made this association between coffee and writing. So when I think of writing, my mouth salivates and I think coffee. And so now I love writing as much as I love coffee. So,
wow.
Yeah. So I'm a bit embarrassed about that one.
No, that's brilliant.
I had to do an experiment on myself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you were talking about with this one that it was the fact that you had something to leave to record that experience that was your motivation to keep doing it. So I was going to ask, how do you, in this situation, do that? So coffee's obviously...
Coffee's one of them. I know. It's going to be terrible if I find out I can't drink coffee anymore. I won't be able to continue writing. No. That will be it for me. I'll have to find a new hobby. But I think this is a novel. It's got no value to anybody but me at the moment. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in terms of the motivation to continue writing it, first of all, I think it's a great story. Yeah. I do love it.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping other people will too. But it's slightly easier because I do have a publisher now.
Yeah.
So this won't have to go on the slush pile. So the publisher I have will read it.
Yeah.
They won't necessarily publish it, but they'll read it. They'll give me honest feedback. I feel like the lottery bit has been taken out. And I think, I don't underestimate the privilege of being in that situation. Having sat with One Italian Summer, which used to be called Weeding Italy, by the way. Oh. So its working title was Weeding Italy. Having sat with that on my desk in my computer for such a long time, not knowing whether anybody would be interested, but thinking it was good enough to be published. Yeah. That can be quite devastating. You know, when you do have an honest feeling that this is good enough to be a book. You know, I've read lots of books and this is as good as some and it's better than others.
Because you did actually get a couple of rejections.
Yes.
Before it was accepted, which would add to that devastation.
Well, rejections, but also just non-replies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, which is worse.
Yeah.
Or maybe.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Someone said that, yeah.
So I had, so I sent it to a few different places and got nothing back. And, they say if you haven't heard from us in 12 weeks,
that's
move
a long
on.
time.
I think the worst thing that happened, or the thing I wished I'd done differently, is I actually entered the manuscript into a prize. And the rules of entering were that you can't have it being considered by any other publisher.
Okay.
So it wasn't a big prize. It was a memoir prize. And yet they took 9 months to sort of get back to anybody. And it wasn't shortlisted or anything like that. So for 9 months it sat there, not doing anything.
Yeah.
And I did regret being such a good girl, really, and doing what they said.
But that's
and
what you do when...
Yeah, that's right. And, I've heard lots of people say, just ignore that advice and send it to everyone. And just, if they love it, they'll forgive you for having sent it to other places, But I did feel like I lost a lot of time. But then in the end, when it did get picked up, it got picked up by 2 publishers at the same time.
Yeah.
So I was in this really fortunate situation where I got to sort of choose. And I don't underestimate the fact that because that happened at the same time, that it might have created a little bit more enthusiasm for the manuscript than it might have had, had it just landed on one person's desk. So, yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
I'm just thinking lots of things. Are you actually planning, would you like to do woofing again, do you think?
Yes, I would. I'd totally recommend it to anybody for lots of reasons.
Yeah.
So we went for reasons that are quite unusual. We went because we actually wanted to get some work experience. We wanted to learn how to run a small farm, how to possibly live off it financially. And we just felt that we weren't doing it right. So we moved from Sydney to the Adelaide Hills to do that, and we were just hopeless at it. I was more hopeless than Shannon, but and so going to Italy was our way of trying to learn how to do it. But most people that we came across woofing are doing it because it's a cheap way to travel. Yeah. Because you get all your food and accommodation in exchange for working. Or they're doing it because it's a great way to immerse yourself in a culture. Yeah. Because you get to stay with a family and you do what that family does. So they take you to community events and you're just part of the community. Others do it because they want to learn a language, and you can immerse yourself in a language, because you have to live and work alongside people who are speaking that language. So people do it for all sorts of reasons. Yeah. And it's great for all those reasons. And we'd definitely do it again, not so much to learn, but for those other reasons, because it's a wonderful way to travel and not be a tourist. I don't think the kids would necessarily come with us next time. I mean, they're much older now, but they can say no. But yeah, I don't think that they'd come with us. But yeah, we'd include it in a trip. Yeah.
Well, because that would in itself make it a very different experience doing it without the kids, just as the two of you. That would change the dynamic as well. And you've hosted too, haven't you?
We have, but just once.
Yeah. How did that go? I wanted to know.
It was wonderful, but we sort of it was one of the families that we had stayed with who hosted us, and it was fabulous. But we were good friends by then.
Yeah.
So we spent a lot more time taking them to the beach and showing them the sights than we did getting them to work in the garden. Yeah. Yeah. We were pretty hopeless hosts or wonderful hosts, depending on how you see it. So, yeah.
I had to ask you, I was reading the acknowledgements. I've got this thing about reading acknowledgements.
So do I. It's the first thing I read.
Yeah, it's
I
really
love reading acknowledgements.
Yeah. And you thanked Carol Lefebvre for helping you to learn how to turn a phrase.
Yes.
How did that come about? And how did she teach you that?
Yeah, okay.
If I can ask you to summarise all that.
Yeah, sure. Summarise, 8 months of mentoring. Yeah. So Carol is an Adelaide writer. She writes fiction and non-fiction. Mm-hmm. She's a beautiful writer. And I approached her to do a mentorship. Mm-hmm. So I haven't done a creative writing master's or PhD or anything like that. Mm-hmm. I've done the odd sort of workshop. And before this, I hadn't done anything residential either. So I'd done the odd workshop and so on. And so I felt like I needed some instruction. And I really believe in mentors, no matter what you're doing. I believe in mentors for all sorts of things. Professionally, I've always had mentors and so on. So that's just a model that works for me. Mm-hmm. And so I started seeing her as a mentor. I'd give her 1,500 words and she would look at those words and we'd work through them together. And I remember when I first met her, so I hadn't worked with her yet, and I'd given her some words and we sat down over coffee and there's my pages just with so many red lines through all the sentences. And she started talking to me about a sentence. And it was a funny thing because I'm quite a big picture thinker. Mm-hmm. I'm a planner. That's what I do as a job. I plan things. I'm a strategic planner. Mm-hmm. And that's where I start. And I thought that what I really needed was I really wanted her to validate all of my structural kind of choices around the book and things like that, the big picture stuff, the themes and etc. And she started talking about the first sentence and I'm thinking, oh, this isn't going to work for me. Do you know what I mean? Where a comma goes. And it was the best thing it was exactly what I needed. Wow. And because these things are never disconnected, the nitty gritty, the sentence isn't disconnected from the structure. Yeah. But actually I didn't know how to write a sentence that well. Do you know what I mean? What I knew was just intuitive. Yeah. But she broke it down in a way that I could then apply to everything new that I wrote. Yeah. But the most beautiful thing that she told me that really sticks in my mind, she taught me how to turn a sentence, and this is her words. Yeah. And I hope I'm not giving away her secrets here. But it was basically about you can have a sentence that is perfectly correct. There's nothing wrong with it. But it sits a bit flat on the page. And just by moving the words around, by turning it around a little, you can make it a much more powerful sentence. So she gave an example, and I'm going to stuff it up, I'm sure, but I'll try. An example of something like, we travelled from England to Australia, and my mother died on the way. So this might be historical. We travelled from England to Australia on a boat and my mother died on the way. Mm-hmm. But there's nothing wrong with that sentence and it tells you everything you need to know. But when you turn it, she would suggest something like, we travelled from England to Australia and on the way my mother died. And what's different about those two sentences is that the important word is at the very end. Yeah. And it creates like a cliff. Yeah. And it's something that you want to, it just creates tension. Yeah. And you want to see what the next sentence is going to say. And it was such good advice. Yeah. And she would suggest that you really think about the words that you put at the beginning and the end, not just of a sentence but of a clause, so it could be just before the comma. So what are those words? Can you turn your sentence so that the heavy, important words are in the right place?
Wow.
Yeah.
And that really comes into psychology of the readers too.
Oh, completely.
Because it's quite a subtle way of addressing what a reader is actually looking for in what they're reading. But it's a very difficult thing to be able to do.
Well, particularly if you don't know about it. But once you know about it, it's not that difficult to read your own work and go, how can I turn this sentence? And I think you're right. As a reader, you know, the reading is a bit like breathing, and you want a sentence to be a breath that they go.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
And there were so many points reading One Italian Summer where I had to just stop, and you just worded things so beautifully, with such laden with this meaning that was so much bigger than what you were actually, it might have just been a simple sentence, but the meaning inside it just gave pause to what you were trying to communicate, which is an art. And I love that you say this is an apprenticeship, because it's an incredible apprenticeship. But no, that's beautiful. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing that journey in your writing and with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for reading it and for for appreciating it. It's not, I was a bit nervous actually originally publishing it, because I'm not on social media. I'm not a sharer.
I noticed that.
So there's a certain irony in me publishing a memoir, which is all about me.
Yeah. And it's very honest and very vulnerable.
Yeah.
You really didn't hold anything back.
So I was quite nervous before publishing it. I had all sorts of anxieties about putting it out there. But there is a funny thing that happens, and I have a writer friend, Rebecca Clarkson, who lives in the hills as well. She's a really wonderful writer, and if you do ever get the chance to read her book, Barking Dogs, it's extraordinary, and it's about set in Mount Barker, but it's fictional, but it's extraordinary. But she and I were talking about this, and about once the book is published, it's a bit like having a grown-up child. It's out there, and it makes its own way.
Yeah.
And there is this strange disconnection now from not from that story, but from that book.
Yeah.
And it is its own thing, and I'm very grateful when I get feedback, positive feedback about it, and I don't get negative feedback because I'm not on social media.
Yeah, that's right.
So the people who make an effort to actually contact me have really they've really made an effort to find an email address, and I'm so grateful that there's something about it that has resonated with them.
Yeah.
And that's what I said to you earlier on. In terms of publishing something, it had to have something about it that was universal.
Yeah.
And when I do talk to people who've enjoyed it, it is those universal things that they've enjoyed about it, because they can reflect on their own life. It isn't all about me. It's about us.
Yeah.
Some of those things. So,
and it's the kind of book that now I'm going to force all of my family and friends to read, because
I think that's an excellent idea.
Well, not only is it beautifully written and it's just such a pleasure to read, but it's got that thing about it where they will get it. Other people, there'll be something that they can take from it.
I hope
is
so.
Special.
Yeah, I hope so. And thank you for saying that.
Oh, that's all right.
That's the best. Yeah, that's the best feedback.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us into your beautiful home today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
And we look forward to seeing what comes next.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.